Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Travis Brady. I'm the Director of Operations and Facilities at Greenberg Nature Center down in Scarsdale, which is in Westchester County, so in the lower part of the state. I've been did the Master Naturalist training last year. I really enjoyed it. I've been able to get some volunteer hours in here and there. I also run my own company, which is Mosaic Wildlife, which started off as an animal trapping and nuisance wildlife control business, but it's kind of morphed more into the education and consulting side. And that's my my email there if you ever want to get in touch with me for anything else. So at the Greenberg Nature Center, where I've been working for about the last 17 years, we had a piece of probably just shy of 2 acres piece of property of the property that was overgrown. This was the overall property was a historic manor home and gentleman's farm back in the day. The manor house that's there was completed in 1918. They had a sheep farm, they had apple orchard, they had vineyards, and the site that we're looking at here is actually the remnants of the old apple orchard. And there's still a couple, 3 or 4 apple trees in there that are 100+ years old that still produce fruit, which is kind of great. But being neglected for over 40 or 50 years, a lot of invasives took over. This place was completely overgrown with porcelain berry, multiflora rose, malum in it. It had almost everything that you didn't want in there to be in there. So we made, as an organization, we made a concerted effort to transform this overgrown weed-infested patch into something a little bit more ecological valued, and we determined that a native wildflower meadow would be the way to go. And the reason we did that was the amount of meadow and prairie in the country has dropped by like 90% since the time the first Europeans arrived on our shores, and we have now close to, it's just a little under a couple points under of long grass across our country than what we have in national parks. So national parks just has a few more acres of land and property than what we have in long grass. And long grass being a monoculture and heavily needing water, it's an issue. So we decided to turn this piece of property back into a native wildflower meadow, keep some of the succession out of it and see what we could do here. So this was after one of the initial clearings. We tried to focus on keeping anything in there that was worthwhile keeping, any of the natives. So there's some good stuff in there, and we worked around it as much as possible. We connected with the guy by the name of Bill Boyce. He runs a company called Biosphere Landscaping. He actually did a lot of the restoration work of the Meadowlands down in Jersey. So he was a great resource, just a great guy to work with. His whole crew was great. And he kind of designed, he took the lay of the land and created a design for us. And this is kind of the initial sketch of the design. It has a couple different walking paths through here around the outside, certainly. And then we actually ended up putting one down right through the middle too, so people can kind of be enveloped into the meadow as they're walking through. So this was our blueprint that we worked off of. There's a question in the chat, 1 second. Yeah, please come and visit. The grounds are open every day. The building and operations are only open, closed on Mondays, but they're open Tuesday through Sunday. So there's a picture of Bill right there. Bill's a great guy, and that's him working on some of the seed. If you look behind him, a couple years prior to turning this into a wildflower meadow, we have one of my colleagues on the staff at the Nature Center is an apiary, so he put his beehives back here. So we already had some beehives out there, so there's already some pollinator activity, but we worked around that, and Bill, as well as this guy, who is Larry Weiner, Larry Weiner, landscape architects. Larry's pretty much one of the foremost meadow guru guys in the Northeast. He is really knowledgeable, and he's the one that kind of helped us to do the analysis of the soil, and create a seed mix that was specific for not just our meadow, but for each individual side of our meadow. Some of it's uphill, some is downhill, some gets a little bit more sun, some has a little bit more sandier soil. So he had very, very custom seed mixes for the meadow. So without Bill and Larry and one other team member I'm going to introduce to you here in a few minutes, this project never would have happened. But if you need any work, I highly recommend them. I can't recommend them enough for anything on landscape design. But Larry is especially great with native wildflower meadows of any size. So here's part of the probably a quarter of the meadow after we scraped it out. A lot of people use pesticides and herbicides, or they burn it to get rid of the invasives. We did some manual clearing by hand the first couple passes. Then we had a machine that came in and it kind of grinds up the soil, but grinds it up and actually chews up any woody roots that may be in there. So we were able to do most of the clearing without using any pesticides. It's a little bit slower, a little bit more labor intensive, and it's not 100% effective. So we knew going into this that we would have to stay on top of any of the invasives and any of the other aggressive plants that we didn't want coming back up. But we see we have it marked out because we kind of worked it into, there's about 5 or 6 different distinct areas throughout our meadow. That's Bill. Looks like he's up there broadcasting some of Larry's special seed mix. All right, so this is the complete team. There's Bill here, Biosphere. This is Larry, who I introduced myself. And this is Kathy Ludden. Kathy is one of our board members at the Nature Center and completely passionate about native wildflowers. She's converted almost all of her property at home and then ran out of space to convert. So then she came over to the Nature Center and bounced some ideas off of us. And we decided that this meadow, this now meadow was the perfect place for her to expand, and we created this team, and it's been a great working relationship amongst all of us. So here's another look at the meadow. This is before planting. A couple things I want to point out. These are the bees I mentioned earlier. This is our center path, which actually turned out to be much more narrow than what it looks like here. But over here on the left-hand side, the idea of having a native meadow sounds great to me as a naturalist and a wildlife guy to support the native wildlife, the bees, birds, butterflies, turtles, everybody that has since come back to this area. But being a nature center and pushing the education, I felt that we really needed some outdoor classroom spaces worked in here. So Bill worked in 3 different areas of outdoor classrooms. And this one right here was one of Kathy's favorites. This is what we call the oak tree meadow. So these are 5 or 6 young oaks, which have now grown up quite a bit. And I think I have a photo of it in a minute. But it's a very serene place. Of course, oaks are great trees to have around. They have tons of ecological benefit. So this is one of it doesn't look like a classroom now in this photo, but it has become one of our great classroom. And we also have a classroom space in the middle here that I'll show you in a bit, and one up on the far end of the meadow. Was there much damage to the soil structure with the heavy equipment used to remove the invasives? Would cardboard compost layering work, especially for smaller meadows? We've actually, that's a good question. We've actually worked with a couple different areas on our property since then where we have done some of the lasagna cardboard layering, and it's worked out very well. One of the areas that we were working on recently has a lot of mugwort and garlic mustard. Anyone who knows about invasives know those are pretty aggressive plants and hard to get rid of. So we did a lot of manual pulling with trying not to disturb the soil too much, and then we lay down quite a bit of cardboard and top dress that with some wood chips. And we're year 2 on that process. I don't have any photos of that in this presentation, but it's done well. It did not knock out all of the invasives, but it certainly took it down to a much more manageable area, something that a person can go in there and tend to, as opposed to needing a whole crew or equipment. So the soil compaction was something we were concerned about. Not so much with the equipment that was tilling and chewing up the soil, but we brought in some heavy equipment to build a structure in here later, which I'll show you. So this is the same oak circle, looking at it from a different angle. These trees have grown up a little bit more, and they're bigger than that now, but it's just a nice, serene, and very enclosed spot. And this area is probably less than 100 yards from a very major throughway. If you know anything about Westchester County, Central Avenue runs right through the heart from White Plains to Yonkers. It's 4 lanes. It's a lot of traffic, a lot of industrial and commercial spot. And it's loud down there, but as soon as you get up into this meadow, not all the noise, but a majority of the noise just kind of disappears, and you do feel like you're in your own little slice of heaven. So here's another view of the early side when we were still designing it. We did leave quite a bit of material in here. This right up here, it's kind of hard to see from this area, was some old bayberry bushes that were probably at least 50 years old, maybe older. We can't guarantee they're older than that, but we know they're at least 50. So we left those and worked around some of the other stuff. Here's another one of our outdoor classroom spaces that we wanted to work in. We call this Stone Circle, or some of the educators call it Stonehenge. It's actually turned out to be a really great addition. The stones are not only beautiful, but they're a natural seating area for our classes. And I think, yep, there's a photo of me teaching classes in that same stone circle. So the meadow would be behind me from here and down to my right for the most part. But this is right on the border of our forest and our meadow. And this is our third educational spot. We actually built an arbor, an open arbor in the middle. And this is where I was worried about the heavy equipment doing the soil compaction. And Bill designed this as well from Biosphere. And he actually designed, it's a little bit hard to see in this photo, but he designed the lumber and woodwork to mimic the veins of the butterfly of the monarch. And it actually came out really nicely. And the reason we did that was every year in the summer, we netted off, we add doors to it. And you can see those veins a little bit better here, or representation of those monarch veins. And we add some doors to it, and then we plant it out with all more natives. And then we release native butterflies in there, red admirals, question marks, monarchs, certainly. I think we had 7 or 8 different species of native butterflies and moths in it this year. And it's an exhibit for people to come in. They get a guided tour from one of our educators that starts up of our building, walks through some of our planted out gardens, and ends up in the meadow and able to walk through with a live flight, free flight butterflies. So those 3 areas were crucial for me to have an educational component of the meadow. Otherwise, it's a lovely space that most people wouldn't visit on their own. So this is an early view of the meadow. This might be year 1. And the way it works is after you seed it, and the plants start growing up, and they're cute and they're small, and you get really excited. And then Larry, the meadow guru, says, "Okay, guys, it's time to mow it down again." I'm like, "What? We need to mow it?" He goes, "Yeah, you have to mow it the first year. As soon as the plants start growing up and going to flower, you mow it back down to about 3 or 4 inches." And the philosophy of that is to help to subdue the weeds that are still in there. In the first year seed mix, there was a cover crop because we seeded it in December, and it's a winter wheat that we put in there to help kind of hold things in place. And we knew it was going to come up first, and we also want to cut that back before it went to seed. And then there's some other stuff that was in there, but the way we treated it without pesticides and without burning it, we needed to mow the meadow back the first year as soon as the flowers start to bloom. So it's a little bit of a heartbreak to put all the work into it and see the flowers come up and then be beautiful, and then have to go back in there and mow it right back down. But you mow it for the first 2 years, and on 3rd year, you do a little bit better. So this was our 2nd year of the meadow. This side right here is the only area that we did not do seed. We actually did a small test spot from containers. So in the back here, you can see that rock circle, that teaching area. Here's one of the old historic apple trees, again, over 100 years old, still producing apples on it right now. But we did some grasses, some mountain mint, some coneflower, and some other things in here, some baptisia. And we did this little section from containers, knowing that it would grow up sooner and quicker, and we would have something to show to our classes, as well as to some other potential donors if they wanted to come in and support the project further. And these are some of those first year plants. As soon as they're very cute, and as soon as they start growing up, we have to come in and mow it. So as I said, it's a little bit of a heartbreak, but it's like that saying, you got to break an egg to make an omelet. So you have to do a little bit of an investment into it, and then it produces in later years. In addition to the plants, I mentioned that that oat circle and stone circle are right on the border of our forest, so we always have a little bit of succession trying to come back in, as well as some invasives. You can see some of this English ivy. So we try to stay on top of the invasives as aggressive as we can, and we let some of the trees go. So this little white pine here, you can tell it's just inches tall, and we started this meadow back in earnest probably in 2014, 2015. And this tree now is probably a good 20-foot tall tree. I almost feel like it's one of my kids. I've been nurturing it so long and watching it grow. But we do have to keep some of the succession from creeping back in as it would. So here's another shot of the meadow. There's the arbor in the middle. The oat circle is way down here, and got some bayberries. And this is a section here that we did by containers. Everything up here on the back side of the arbor and on this whole side is all done by seed. And everything that grows up, we let it stay there throughout the summer and fall and winter as well. And we do a late winter, early spring cut. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, it provides a lot of food and habitat to the winter wildlife. I actually walk through there before I do the cut, and often late March. I'm walking through just to see what's going on in there, making sure there's no nest and anything. And there's a ton of wildlife activity that is going on in there, especially in some of these taller, thicker grasses. Some of the voles and shrews love just nesting in there. But when we cut it, the first year we used a machine that just cut it once, and then we had to carry all the cut material off into our compost. So it was quite labor intensive. The second year we rented a machine that actually ground it up in place, but it kind of scalped the land a little bit too much in our opinion. And we actually just ended up buying a John Deere lawn tractor with a varying deck height, and is able to cut it to about 3 to 4 inches, and it actually works out really well. We put mulching blades on it, and I may have to do a pass or two on some of the heavier stuff, but for the most part, 1 or 2 passes at most, and I end up with a nice rich soil down here. We do watch it to make sure that not too much organic material gets left behind and makes the soil too rich. But again, we started this in 2015, probably the first year we cut it heavily, and the soil has not become dangerously rich. The plants are still doing very well there. I mentioned the invasives. We do have a large issue of English ivy throughout our entire property, and it's something we've been actively working on. Every year for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been hiring college interns. I get about 8 college interns that come in, and they become our ecological and conservation internship crew, and they help me tackle some of these problems. So some of the gardens that we have now, which are planted out, were heavily infested with invasives. But it does take some work, some manual labor to get in there, stay on top of it, but we are making progress on some of this area. This is one of my favorite plants. This is World Loosestrife, and it's something that we actually did not put into our seed mix. It just kind of volunteered itself in through the forest plants that we have in the surrounding area. There's some poison ivy in there as well, of course. But seeing plants, the meadows, you can plant them out certainly, but they never stay the way you put them out there. And certainly with the seed mix, you never know what comes up. These World Loosestrife may come up this year and not next year, and then I'll see them again in 2 or 3 years. And it's all dependent on what the plant likes and the conditions of that year. But it is nice to see things pop up that you didn't plant, certainly when they're natives. But it's something that keeps us on our toes as we're walking through and monitoring to make sure, is that a good one? Is that a not so good one? How aggressive is it, even if it is a good one? This is prairie smoke. It really starts to become very, for me, one of my favorite places of the nature center, because I'm often down there early morning or late in the evenings. I'm down there by myself or with the wildlife, and it's nice and serene. And seeing shots like this it makes it all worthwhile. This is a lovely little plant, a little sensitive, but a lovely little plant. So here we have a nice stand of Baptisia. Baptisia, we have a couple different colors, some purple and some yellow. There's some beard tongue over here. The pollinators really love the beard tongue, especially some of the larger bumblebees that we have. I mentioned we have our honeybee hives on one side of the meadow, but we also, on the other side of the ridge, we have a large hotel for solitary bees and wasps. Just more for display and education, because most of them can find their own homes, but it does get actively used, and we see them making their way over here to the meadow to visit a lot of these plants. Just another, as the meadow has grown and matured, this is probably after year 3 here, it looks like. We ended up with a lot of deer tongue in here, which is a native plant, but it's a pretty aggressive native plant. Even though it's native, we let it go the first couple of years, and it kind of ended up biting us in the butt, where we had to go back in and kind of contain it and keep it in check. After some of our seed mix became more well established, it does its own self to keep the deer tongue in check. But the first couple of years is pretty aggressive, and we had to go in there and manually take it out. So you can't just go down there and look at how pretty it is. It's always active management. I'm not even sure what this one is. Actually, I may have it written down somewhere. I'm more of an animal guy than I am on the plants, but I do know that this is something that was in our original seed mix, and we didn't see it for the first 4 or 5 years. So this might have popped up on year 5 or year 6, which again keeps us on our toes to see what's growing and popping through. So we're looking at a little bit of a later fall or early fall photo here. The Joe Pye weed's really coming in. You got a little bit of the goldenrod starting to pop. The goldenrod, much like the deer tongue, is native, but it's also an aggressive native. So this year, which I don't think I have any photos of, the goldenrod actually it bullied its way into more areas of the meadow than we wanted it to. And we let it go to bloom this year because it's such a beautiful plant, and the bugs love it, the pollinators love it. But we will have to go in there and, much like the deer tongue, manually control the spread of the goldenrod. But mixed in with it, it's not just flowering plants. We have a majority of the meadow is our grasses. There's some of that nice goldenrod, beautiful little plant. This is looking up the oak circles right here on our left. We got the butterfly arbor without the butterflies. This is later in the season, certainly. And that wide path is certainly a little bit more narrow, which gives the plants, they just come and keep creeping in. So every once in a while, I have to go in here and kind of firm up the edges of the path just so we don't lose them. What type of grasses do we plant? We have a number of carrots, some of the sedges, they're a little bit smaller. Some of them, the blues. There's a couple switch grasses. I can't tell you all the ones that we have in there. I certainly have a plant list that I can share later after the fact for anyone who's interested. How long do you keep the arbor native butterflies? We normally run the we played with the butterfly exhibit for a number of years, and now we kind of find our sweet spot where we do for the month of July. If our suppliers, which are all very local butterfly breeders, have enough livestock, we might stretch it into the first week or 2 of August, but it's normally for 4 to 5, maybe 6 weeks at most in July and early August. There's one of our pollinators. And this is kind of what we love the flowers, but for me, the flowers are just, they become nice habitat and food for the wildlife, for the animal wildlife. There's one of the nice grasses, a little bit more of a fall look. And looks like the Joe Pye is already past bloom over here. There's some milkweed. Let's see what this chat is. Do you have issues with non-native grasses? And if so, how do you control them? That's a great question, and a plant list would be great. We'll take a look at that for you. The grasses, we haven't had that much issue with grasses being invasive or too aggressive in our meadow. We certainly had some mugwort push in a couple years, but on grass front, we haven't really had an issue with it. But it is nice to go down there and see the milkweed and seeing the caterpillars on it. We also be interested in the list of seeds and plants you use, of course. And I could share Larry's contact information too if anyone wants to dig in a little bit deeper on Larry and his at seed mix and how he goes about it. There was some sumac in our meadow already, which we left. We're working around. We do have to control it because it does want to keep putting out suckers and spreading quite a bit, but it does add to the look of the meadow. We have to be careful to not have it grow too much so it doesn't shade out some of the areas, but some of the plants along this side are a little bit more shade tolerant already. A nice fall look there. I think I think at this point I just have a series of different photos. So I'm just going to scroll through some of these pretty quickly so we can wrap up and get to some questions here in a minute. Some milkweed and a milkweed bug, a juvenile milkweed bug. I love the insects, so I'm always looking out for my insect photos. And some days you go down the milkweeds like this and a little bit of breeze goes and it just spreads all over. So this isn't the best photo, but I was down there working one day and, found a little salamander in there. And there's been redbacks, there's been wood frogs, some eastern spotted salamanders. So we've had bluebirds nesting there for a couple of years after we created it. So the wildlife is certainly finding the area and utilizing it. In addition to the insects, I like a lot of the fungi and mushrooms. What insects do you like to photograph best? Oh, I could photograph any of them. Just give me time and space. But I'm a big beetle fan. I think I have one of my favorite beetle photos in here in a few minutes. So that's just the same mushrooms a couple days later. So just being able to watch. We all know that mushrooms kind of develop pretty quickly. You can see the change there, but the meadow does the same thing, just not as quick. So every time you walk through every couple of weeks, it looks a little bit different. This year in the meadow, we did not get our first bloom until probably mid-April. I don't know why it was so late this year, honestly, because in years past, we've actually had some sort of blooms going in there and late in March and one year in late February. And it blooms, something's blooming all the way through at least early to mid-November. All right, so this is something that this is certainly a egg case for our praying mantis. In the first couple of years after we had the meadow, we started seeing a lot of praying mantis, but unfortunately they were all the invasive ones. And you can kind of tell the invasives kind of make a little bit more of a oval egg shape, whereas more of the natives they stretch it out along the stem. I should have put a photo of a native egg case in here, but I didn't. But we did have some wildlife that come in, especially bugs that we did not want. These guys sitting there, and they feed at a different height than our native praying mantis. They feed a little bit higher in the on the grasses and plants and take off more of the pollinators. Do you have a problem with deer chomping too much of the foliage? How do you keep them out in the first few years prior to establishing the plants? Great question. And deer are an issue for almost everyone. The first couple of years that we were putting the meadow in place, oddly enough, our property did not have a deer population. We would get a transient deer every year or two. They would kind of hang out and then move on. So we never had a standard population. The last 3 or 4 years, we had a doe who brought in another doe, and they both had fawns. So our population right now is 13 deer, which is still within the limits of being able to handle their feeding and the pressure they put on the plants. Of course, they get all of our best plants. They get the blooms before we get to them. But the deer are there. And in one of the so we've been working on this meadow for a while, but I'm getting ready to push into the forest and do some forest understory and native plants there. We do actually have some natural population of lady slipper on the property, which is really nice that we do protect. So we're going to start to do deer exclosures in some of our property as we start to do the forest native plants. So here's a chrysalis of a monarch. It's nice to be able to go out there and see these things and watch them develop and change. And they sit there and start munching away, and they kind of, sometimes they'll destroy a whole plant, but that's what the plants are there for. But you just plant enough of it and they do okay. So it's nice to see them around. And this year, we didn't have that many monarchs this year compared to years past. We know the pressures are on them. I really don't know what the future holds for the monarch population or all of our pollinators, but we still get a few, and we enjoy to see them when they're there. I'm just going to blow through some of these photos real quick. This is a nice fall. We, as I mentioned, we live all of this plant stock up all winter long for food and habitat use for the animals. This nice little monarch. Some more Joe Pye. It's always good when you meet someone else down there exploring and learning. To the kids, the meadow, especially when it's grown up, it feels a little bit more like a maze. The grasses are well over their heads. They can't see through the meadow, and they have no idea how big it is or where the paths may lead or connect to. So it's fun to walk through with someone new and watch them explore and stumble upon some of the areas in there. The beard tongue is one of my favorite plants as well. All right. I do like the spiders as well. There's one of my beetle. These dogbane leaf beetles. Those are their actual colors, and sometimes I would say the photo does not do them justice. You get them in a bright sunny day, and those iridescent colors just pop and kind of make them glow of sorts. They're really stunning creatures. See all the pollen on the bags back here doing their work. We had we have our bees in our hives, but before we established our bees run on the edge of the meadow, and it looks like a dogwood up here. We had a swarm of bees, so we were able to actually collect these swarms and put them in our hive, and that hive is probably the strongest hive that we got. They've been going strong for a number of years, where some of our other hives that we either purchased the queen from, they make it through, but not as strong as the native wild-caught bees. Red admiral, one of my favorite butterflies, caterpillars. Oh, so like the mantis, we got the net for the lanternfly, so they've been moving in. Give me 1 second, okay? I gotta send a note to a car pickup. Give me 1 second, y'all. I'm sorry. Hey, Jen. Yeah. Can you do an 8 o'clock pickup? Yeah. Sparkill, thank you. Sparkill. Sorry about that. Trying to juggle a carpool for my kid. It must be the end of my slideshow there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and happily take any questions if there are any. And thank you all for listening. I'm a little bit more committed to this. I've been putting blood, sweat, and tears into it for a couple of years. And I love seeing it change and develop and grow. It may not be as interesting to someone who hasn't been there, but thank you for your time either way.
Thanks so much, Travis. Thanks for the great information and the really amazing pictures. It looks like you have some great things growing there. I'm looking through the chat to see if there are any questions, but does anybody have anything?
Paul, you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question. Do you have a sense historically before European settlement whether there were many meadows in that part of the county, or was it?
No, there were not actually. That's a very thoughtful question and the way to go back. This is most likely straight up forest prior to the European, coming in. We do know that a number of the Lenape tribes lived and hunted in the area. One of the more specific tribes, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, it's something like the Wikisikick, which kind of goes from where we're at in the Scarsdale area, mid-county, over to Mamaroneck. And I've actually found a couple of artifacts on the property, arrowheads and broken arrowheads. So it's certainly used for a hunting ground. It is a high rocky ridge. It's one of the highest points around, which makes sense for hunting. But the idea of it being natural meadow is very, very improbable. So we did debate that, whether we should take it back, let succession take place and take it back to forest, or turn it into meadow. It was an active discussion point. And we felt that of our 33 acres, most of which is forested already, we had the forest aspect covered. So we wanted to promote the wildflowers, and also being not just a nature preserve, but a educational facility as well. Good question. All right, there's a lot of chat notes coming in. I'm just seeing if there's any questions in there.
Adrian asked, would you please show the little flower that it says were able to identify, but Adrian, I think you mean the one he was not able to identify?
Correct. Sorry about that.
The one that
Right.
took a few years to come,
Yep.
to come up.
Are you wanting to see the photo or trying to identify it? The photo. Yep. Give me 1 second. I might have the name of it in one of my notes here. All right, let me go back and share my screen again. And we're going to back it up quite a bit. And Christy, if you're still able to look at the questions and let me know if anything pops up, that'd be great.
Oh,
I
okay,
have a-
someone asked- oh, go
I
ahead.
have a quick question about mowing of the meadow.
Yes.
What is the major purpose? I've got a meadow 2 years in, haven't mowed it. So curious as to purpose of it and whether I'm too late now.
I would not say you're too late. We find that if it doesn't get mowed, then all the dead plant material from years past ultimately falls over and smothers the new plants that are trying to poke its way up. That may not always be the case for like a planted container established garden where the plants are a little bit more robust, but when we're growing from seed and having new seed drop every year, those plants are not as robust their first couple years, and they really need to fight their way up through the understory of the meadow. So when we cut out or grind up and chip up the dead plant material, we find that those younger plants are much better established, or able to become much better established.
So I put mine in around a new pond, and it's taking its time establishing itself. This
Yep.
is the first year I've had flowers in it, but it's certainly pretty sparse still, and the soil isn't great. So am I better off just letting it continue to grow?
I would, if it were me and the soil's not that great, I would probably want to poke around and do a little bit of soil study and see what the soil makeup is, because some of the native meadow plants themselves, not so much for around the wetlands, they actually do really well in poor soil. You don't want the soil too nice, actually. And there's a photo, again, I should have put it in, but I didn't, that shows the length or depth of the roots from like long grass, which is like 2 or 3 inches, to like a coreopsis plant, a very common plant. It can have a root system that goes down 5 or 6 feet. Some of the other grasses are, extending over 10 feet deep. So they're able to get their moisture without the water that long grass needs, but they also don't like the soil being as rich and as fertilized as long grass.
Right.
So is this someone might know, is this a penstemon?
It doesn't look like a pest to me.
Okay. Again, I'm more of a critter guy than I am plants, but I am learning most of these along the way.
Darling little flower. I'd love to know what it is. I'll work on it.
Let me know if you do. Thanks. There's a question here. What are your hopes and goals for the meadow? I would say that's twofold. One is to continue to produce and produce a better wildlife habitat. That's my personal goal for it. But with that, and it's great to hear that some of you are planting your own little meadows and native plants. We as environmentalists can kind of preach as much as we want, but until someone's ready to listen and hear it, they don't hear it. But we are seeing a trend of more and more people starting to switch over to natives, to reject some of the non-natives. And even some of the municipalities that we work with, their planting palette are starting to reject any non-native plants, which is great to see. But the second goal for this was to create an educational component of it to help spread the word about the importance of native plants and native pollinators and why we should support them.
Peggy asked, can you describe the lasagna method in regards to establishing a meadow? How does the degree of wetness affect which plants you use? So two questions.
Yeah, on the cardboard lane, the lasagna, we did not do that with this meadow. We did it with a couple of test plots in other areas. One to knock down the garlic mustard and the mugwort. And you kind of do as much of a removal as possible, whether it's through cutting or pulling. The one thing about pulling and weeding that way is that you disturb the soil, and that allows any other native seeding to have a better chance of getting established. So we're always debating which plants we're trying to pull versus which ones we're trying to cut, depending on how solid their root systems are. But after you get it weeded down or out, then we took 3 to 4 layers of cardboard boxes. Take all the tape and staples off, certainly what's just the paper, layer it down, you wet it down so it's nice and wet and damp, and then we top dressed it with 2 to 3 to 4 inches of wood chips. And we just call any local tree company, and they gladly give away wood chips for free. Sometimes you have to be a little cautious about what type of tree it is, or if it's something that had a fungus on it. And sometimes I'll bring in wood chips that are just way too large, and I have to reject them. But for the most part, after you have a relationship with them, they bring in exactly what I need. And they dump it pretty close most of the time, and we just top dress the cardboard with the wood chips, let it sit for a year. The following year and two now, like I said, the invasives between the garlic mustard and the mugwort has been cut drastically. I would say over 80%, which is a pretty large reduction in their plants. And we run a summer camp at the Nature Center as well, for about 10 weeks of the summer. And again, it's not just fun and games. We also teach the kids. So we teach them about the invasives. And when they know there's something that they can affect, whether it's like deadheading or cutting off the seed heads before they can open up, they love having a task like that. So we've actually put our summer camp kids to work with either squishing the lantern flies or taking off the seed heads of some of the invasives.
Somebody asked, with all the flowers and the buds, are there more birds and bats?
I watch the bat population quite often. We do have a couple wetlands on our property, of 2 vernal pools. They certainly seem to, and those are a little bit more on the one is deep in our forest, and the other is on the edge of the forest. So the bats prefer those areas. I see them over the meadows certainly, but I see the bats more over the wetlands. So I do not feel confident to say that we've seen an increased bat population due to the meadow. They're there though. Birds, yes. As I mentioned, we are on a very heavily populated and developed corridor. Our neighbors on one side is a golf course, and on the other side is a high school. So if you consider their campuses along with our property to be green space, even though you could argue the definition of green spaces for the school campus or the golf course. If you consider them green spaces, we have about 400 acres of green area. and we see we're a rest overstop for along the flyway for a lot of the birds. So even before the meadow, we saw a lot of birds come through, but with the meadow, we see them hang around a little bit longer. As I said, the bluebirds, which we haven't seen for many, many years, we certainly had a nesting pair for 2 or 3 years. I haven't seen them the last 2 years, so I'm not excited about that aspect, but they were there.
Wonderful.
All right. Any other questions? Well, if not, my email was on that first slide, or you could get it from Christy if you want.